That's a good way to
bad
start an
groan.
episode because it just
A
about
groan?
sums up where we're at as a country.
Yeah, yeah. Is that
But
true? A groan?
yeah, yeah, just a sense of exhaustion,
I mean, you're
trepidation.
fasting, so it might be exacerbating things.
Yeah, that is true actually. How are you feeling about all this? Like, I think you know more about my views than I know about yours about the events of the past couple of weeks because you were actually gone. You were on vacation the
Yes.
week that American democracy started to falter,
Yeah.
um, with the Mahmoud Khalil case defying court orders or at least ignoring them, and the sense of a constitutional crisis looming. So you must have.
Um, but hold on, hold on. As I adjust things. I don't know. Are you conflating a lot? I don't think we're in a good place. I came back from vacation. I think I told you I was like, wow, this is scary. It was nice to like get away a little bit and then just sort of
Yeah.
replunge back, and it's like, yeah, it's not good, not good.
Were you
But
not aware of anything that was happening while you were
no, I
gone, or
was
you had a
aware. I
basic
was
sense?
aware. It's aware, but like you don't pay attention. It's a
Yeah.
good reminder how the rest of the country actually doesn't give a shit, and it's fine. Um, but because it doesn't matter ultimately anywhere else except here where we pay very close attention to it. Um,
You don't think other Americans are affected by the health or lack thereof of our democracy? I mean, at some level, it would affect
Anecdotally,
them.
anecdata. Most of the people I talked to on the ski lifts were in Colorado, where I was skiing, were like, "Yeah, I mean, if not like happy Trump voters, at least like whatever, like this kind of feeling of which I think I don't know feels right to me that like people just really voted against Democrats. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
Like and then so whatever all this is, it's just they're just like, yeah, whatever. Quit whining. um no, I mean that it's just that that other sort of adage that people just don't care that much about anything. It's a big country and these sorts of issues, I don't know, don't matter that much. But I mean, I just want to push you on it though. Is I'm personally, I think that the Khalil case is like not the one that pushes us into constitutional crisis at all. I think it's grotesque and ugly, and diabolical because it was picked and done well, quite frankly, to exacerbate these things. But I don't think that's where the constitutional crisis is at all, not even close. So I want to push you on that because I think that's what activated you into despair more than the other case, which I think right now is probably the one that gets us into the most trouble, and that's the deporting the Venezuelans into El Salvador's prisons. But
Yeah, look,
anyway, why don't you tell me a little bit?
I don't think the Mahmoud Khalil case is what leads us to a constitutional crisis, but I do think it's where a lot of us had this definitive realization that it's going to get really bad. It seemed like an inflection point, a hinge moment,
Why?
because it was such a gratuitous attack on not only common sense but on the rule of law, that the president can basically deem anyone who's a green card holder a threat to national security, or someone. It's not even that. There's not even really a justification. I mean, essentially what the DOJ has been arguing is that the president has statutory authority to remove anyone who's not a citizen on basically any grounds. They
I
didn't
mean,
allege that he committed any crime.
but
They didn't
that's a
al-
law, though. It is statutory law. That's the part that I'm
but
pushing you on.
it's one that's
Fine,
rarely.
fine, but that's why I don't think it's a problem. Like, there's all sorts of crazy laws in this country. You know what I mean? Like that. But I mean, I think I texted this to you, or at least to the group at one point when this was happening. I remember when I was on a green card, and I'll tell you, the questionnaires you fill out like to get the green card, it's amply clear that it's just a bunch of gotchas. They can throw your ass out for anything at any point. And I know, American citizens like, oh no, but anyone in America has all the rights. Believe you me, as a green card holder, I didn't believe I had all full rights as an American citizen at any point in my life. Like, get a DUI, can get your ass thrown out. Wouldn't probably happen. What probably would not happen. But like, really, it's at the discretion of the country. And I mean, it's true when you're traveling anywhere else, and maybe you say, but America's different and we should have higher standards. Maybe we should. But I'm telling you, as a foreigner, as a former green card person, I never was disabused of this idea that I couldn't get thrown out for any other reason. So, again, you have students coming in on green cards.
Did you ever think that you could be thrown out for expressing political opinions? I mean, you were working at a magazine, and that was basically your day job. But you didn't have any fear that you would be deported because of the work you did at the magazine. So you didn't live in fear. But now green card holders and visa holders will be living in fear of what they can and cannot say. And the lines are absolutely arbitrary. And again, they are simply at the discretion of a madman or someone who is vindictive. In other words, our president. So I do think something fundamental has shifted for non-citizens in this country. And these are not just non-citizens, they're future American citizens. There are people who we expect to become part of our body politic. And they now they can't say what they believe to be true. And that is frightening for really tens of millions of people who are in this country. This doesn't affect a small number of people. It affects a large number of people who reside currently in the country.
It's certainly chilling on speech. And I'd say that the troubling part of it is not even, I don't really think that the interesting part here is, the effect on people who aren't citizens yet. Because again, I fundamentally don't think that they have, actually rights that they can expect on this sort of stuff. I think that what this just basically shows, and what's troubling about it, that case, is where this is all going. In the sense that the speech chilling, again, is not so much on people who don't have, who may not have, are in this sort of gray zone, but on the rest of us, the ones that do have actual rights. And the question is, where this goes next, because we all are fully expecting that Pam Bondi's DOJ will start going after the press and will start suing and all sorts of things. So I fully expect this to be the first salvo in something bigger. I just want to sort of, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not going to even pretend to try and sort of lawyer this out. But, it's the way that immigration law was written, with, all sorts of sort of leeway between speech and espousing and support for and all the rest of that, which is it's a, truck-sized loophole that they're taking advantage of. Again, I just want to stress one thing. As a green card holder, I never thought that, that I was not there at the sufferance of the government. And I would say that anyone on a green card at any time in the United States should look at the government and be like, let's see what I can get away with, what's legal and what isn't, and where the dangers are. So it's not like I don't have empathy and sympathy for this, but it's like that all of that didn't raise that much of an eyebrow to me. And I have to say that all of the Sturm und Drang really amounts to, is this who we are as Americans?
Which is a relevant question. Yes.
No, but you know what it is? I've always been quite cynical about that, and this kind of thing about oh, who are we really? You know what I mean? Ask black people in the 1950s, who are we as Americans? Oh, and now since we grew up after the 60s, we can pat ourselves on the back. But screw that. We're just a country with all sorts of stuff that dirty stuff that makes any country a country, basically. And so, I don't know, that part doesn't bother me. Like I said, the thing that bothers me about that case is the broader free speech thing and the chilling for the rest of us, not for the non-citizens.
Yeah. But I think you alluded to the issue here is that the Mahmoud Khalil case isn't just about him and his specific circumstances. It's a trial balloon. It's a way that the Trump administration is testing the limits of the system and seeing how far they can go. And they chose someone who's a member of, one of the more vulnerable groups in America, which is Arabs, Muslims, pro-Palestine activists who don't elicit a lot of sympathy from the people in Colorado who are on the ski lifts. They see Mahmoud Khalil as, oh, he's foreign, he's different, he's advocating for this weird Arab cause. He's one of those people who's at an elite university protesting. Oh, those people are so annoying. So I think it was a smart move for Trump. Actually, it wasn't. In some ways, they probably thought it was a smart move. But I think it's a hinge moment because this is the most outrage that I've seen since Trump was elected. People sort of latched onto this and they said, something very frightening is happening. We're going to speak out. And the fact that it just got an amazing amount of coverage. I was really shocked.
Did it? This is the part that I missed, maybe, because I'm shocked. I thought I still think it's a smart move because I think that it very broadly split the Jewish constituency in the country, because he is not just advocating for Palestinian rights like you are, but in fact is I think a much more, let's put it neutrally, activisty person, insofar as that activisty people say dumbass shit all the time. And so, right? But there was no evidence that he said anything particularly dumb or
evidence
that he's part of this organization.
Yeah,
again, I guess
he
this
himself,
is now
he himself hasn't been quoted as saying X, Y, or Z. The things he has said publicly are actually pretty benign, talking about how the liberation of Palestinians and the liberation of the Jewish people are intertwined and Jews have equal rights at our encampments and that sort of thing. But you're right. I mean, yeah, sure. He's a member of an organization where others have said more controversial things, but I just want to make clear that he himself. Yeah.
The main thing is like, it's interesting that you think that this has shifted something in the country and is actually an inflection point that way. I don't know. Maybe it has. Like I said, I've been away for a bit, so I don't know the mood exactly. But at least in my little bubble of mood, I haven't really seen it. So where are you seeing that this is going to be the one that changes things?
Just the nonstop coverage it got in mainstream outlets, the Times, the Post, the FT. I just saw a barrage of endless articles. And
but we're past it. It's not there anymore. Like, that's the thing. That was like 4 days.
Yeah, but
this is again the genius of the Trump people. Like, again, we're on to the next thing. I don't see Khalil anywhere.
But for a week, I think that it was the story, and everyone seemed to be talking about it. Yeah, but I think that now we've moved on. I think it's still. I see this group of cases as being related. So people are now talking about the Venezuelan migrants who are sent to El Salvador. I think that this is a basket of cases that all have to do with executive overreach and testing the limits of the courts, because
right.
And there was a similar case that didn't get as much attention. The Brown University professor and kidney transplant specialist who was deported, and she was on a visa, not a green card. But what was interesting there is that, if I recall correctly, the court ruling that said that a deportation couldn't go forward, that came out at 7:18 p.m. and they started walking her to her gate for her flight to Lebanon at 7:20, and her flight took off at 7:50. And basically what the Trump administration argued was they didn't have enough time to notify the immigration officials at Boston's Logan Airport, because it all happened in the span of 30 minutes. But technically, the Trump administration did ignore a court ruling because her deportation came after the court ruling was issued.
I think this is that case seems to me also much less troubling. Also, didn't the whole hearing just get dropped for some reason on Monday? largely because the lawyers saw that this was a much weaker case or something. I'm not following that one very closely, but that one seems to me ultimately that, again, not great, but like probably much more within it. The real like ignoring the court order stuff is in the Venezuelan case. Really the only one right now where it seems to me they really overreached. All of it, you're absolutely right. They've been pushing the line. The Venezuelan one seems absurd, like fundamentally absurd, and they really are scrambling now. The main question now remains, and I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road for me, Shadi, is this is now psyching out the Supreme Court. I think this Venezuelan case. They've been leading up to it. I think they've found cases where they're on more or less defensible ground, not like solid ground, but like grounds where you can make an argument for what they're doing, and then a favorable number of judges can sort of do this. It seems to me that this what is it, 1798 act that they're invoking for removing the Venezuelans is it just like it really doesn't hold water. And I saw Stephen Miller on CNN. I'll try and find a link and put that in the show notes, making an argument about what this is. And he basically was saying, can any judge anywhere tell the president how to deploy troops in a war zone? And that was his argument to the like his interrogator at CNN. And she was like, that's not the point. That's not the point. It's like, no, that is the point. This is a War Powers Act, and, the president can do whatever. And it's like, and he said, I believe something along the lines of, we are confident that the Supreme Court will see it our way. And that to me reads like, Supreme Court, I dare you to contradict us on this. And so, I think that if the Supreme Court doesn't not just contradict this, but contradict it 9-0, we're in trouble, because then that's where your first like wedge into the Supreme Court is put in. So I think like basically Roberts has
Damir, I don't see that as actually a bad outcome. I would actually see that as a pretty great outcome. A 9-0 ruling would make it very hard for
that's
the
what
Trump
I'm saying.
Administration to defy it.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. But if they don't get a 9-0, if Alito or Thomas decide to actually dissent from this, that's the first wedge in the whole constitutional order. Because even though they'll smack it down, then they start doing about the traitor justices, the traitor conservative justices that are trying to screw the president. Then you start getting death threats and all the rest of it. The main thing, that's the thing to watch for right now, is can the Supreme Court 9-0 this nonsense with the Venezuelans? And I think this is why I'm not, however grotesque, I want to insist on this, like the Khalil stuff's grotesque. I haven't followed this brown woman. Sounds kind of gross, but like whatever, like again, technicalities on these sorts of things. As an aspiring immigrant to this country, know the country you're in, like take the precautions, because you don't have the rights you think you do. Be careful, find out, be informed on it. This Venezuelan thing is, I think, a completely different category and is leading to a big showdown.
Explain why you see it as completely different category. What about it excises?
Because it's less legal. Because it's invoking like a preposterous law. We're not at war with Venezuela. It's invoking War Powers Acts for basically the president to take like actions against people on the territory without any due process, basically, is what it comes down to. And it's very different from Khalil's getting due process of some sort. I mean, look, ultimately...
that's a good point, because
you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
It's worth noting, just for people who aren't fully aware, that many of these Venezuelan migrants were picked, not just coming out of prisons, but picked off the street. And some of them just happened to have gang tattoos that looked similar to this particular gang's tattoos, and that was the pretext for deporting them. So just incredibly arbitrary and gratuitous, and without, as you say, without even the slightest aspect of due process here. So it is really shocking. Like, the more that I think about the Venezuelan case, the more I'm like, wow, they really did that?
Yeah.
And just imagine here that you have these Venezuelan migrants in a foreign country, El Salvador, in a brutal prison under a regime. I should say it's an elected government, but one that has been very brutal towards criminals of any sorts, of alleged criminals, and it's been successful in some ways of getting crime really down in El
Not in
Salvador.
some ways. Not in some ways. I mean, I do
many
want to
ways.
stress that. In all ways. Like, crime is down in El Salvador. I mean,
Yeah, by a lot.
We talked about this, I think, and we'll put another link to my colleague Leon Krause, who did a really good piece like 2 years ago now, but when the prison opened. And I've been absolutely fascinated by Bukele and what he's been doing there, largely because it brings so many of these questions, not the questions we're talking about, but these questions about democracy, freedom, popular will, outcome, legitimacy, all into one, because he transformed the country. He transformed the country by locking away an enormous percentage of young men in the country, just putting them in this mega prison, and just basically crime disappeared overnight. And by and large, people are happy. Anyway, but like, keep going.
Yeah, but it's also sort of obvious if you just like round up a lot of young men, obviously your crime rate is going to go down because young men are the ones who commit crimes. But, putting all that aside, I mean, if you really wanted to, if your priority is to get crime to close to zero, you can be draconian and just arrest anyone who's capable or might potentially commit a crime. The problem is in El Salvador, a lot of these alleged criminals and gang members haven't gotten due process. I mean, that's the thing that kind of goes to the cutting board. But I just imagine here that you find yourself in El Salvador and you don't have due process, and just how it's just remarkable to me. But it's also interesting that they could have had the option of sending these people to Guantanamo, but I think the whole appeal of El Salvador is precisely that they wouldn't have due process. At least in Guantanamo, you do eventually get access to legal counsel. You can actually do some level of appeal. As unfair and unjust as the whole Guantanamo system is, there is actually something there. El Salvador, all bets are off, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens to them. Is there a viable process through which some of these Venezuelan migrants can actually return to the U.S. if there is a more definitive court order? How would that even work? How would you force them? How would you find them? Yeah. And how would you force a foreign government to do something? Because the El Salvadorian president is not under the jurisdiction of American courts. So this is where it gets, I think, really, really fuzzy.
No, I mean, I think redress is very difficult. I mean, I guess I'm focused more on how the Supreme Court rules on this, because this seems to me the big thing. Other sort of delightful things to watch, I think, is, what does contempt of court look like if this district judge rules on it? Do they send someone to arrest Stephen Miller?
I don't know. What does that look like? I'm not actually familiar.
I'm not either, exactly. I saw some speculation about it, but I don't know what it's real or not, so I'm not going to spend time. But I mean, what
is the enforcement mechanism for who actually would have to carry out the order of arresting Stephen Miller if he was in contempt?
Another fascinating question, and ultimately where the chain of command ends up on these sorts of things. I guess it's some sort of marshal is supposed to do it, but what if the president says no, you don't? I don't know. Interesting stuff, right?
Yeah, but presumably all this would lead to rifts within the Republican Party. Republicans are generally willing to go along with Trump quite a long way. But when it comes to defying a conservative Supreme Court, one that rules even 7-7-2, that means that Chief Justice Roberts and a couple of
Barrett,
Barrett at least.
And no, I mean, I think what you're looking at is Trump's best thing that could happen to him is that Alito and Thomas are in dissent.
I don't. But come on, Damir. But it's still.
I think that because that's what you're.
A 7-2 ruling is a strong ruling.
It's a strong enough ruling, but you know what I'm saying? Then the cracks start opening at that point, because then They just go at them. They go at them. They already went after Coney Barrett, and I don't know if you remember all the sort of commentary and like threats and stuff. What a traitor she is. During when she was shaking Trump's hand on this, not the State of the Union, whatever the report to Congress that he did.
Yeah.
Like on social media, they were just like attacking her. Traitor, traitor, traitor.
Wait, why traitor? Wait, remind me. Why were they calling her a traitor?
Oh, I forget. What is it that
it was something from a while back?
Yeah,
right?
it was like some a while back. But they're setting the look. This game is Shadi. The game is this: is how do you break the Supreme Court? That's the whole game right now. How do you break it? You break it by pressure, by politics. And the thing what I think where Roberts is very good is that he has a politician's mind, and he knows that this is a power game. That the stress on the system, it's not about principles, it's not about like all of that. It's how do you maintain your clout. And the Supreme Court has like a nasty sort of thing that it has to do, which is maintain clout and legitimacy without being able to enforce anything. So everything is clout and legitimacy for it. So anything you start like driving wedges into that, 7-2. Bad. Like I will say that's a bad outcome if that happens.
Okay, but let's say there are death threats against some of the members of the court. They have protection.
They start blinking. They start blinking down
really?
the line.
Like, are death threats enough to do that? I mean, that seems
legitimacy
pretty...
is look, because it's not death threats so much. I don't think they're going to get killed. It's more like it really is the legitimacy of it. And if you have, the president and his entire party every day screaming about a traitorous Supreme Court, that it's just like the Overton window shifts on defiance, on everything. And quite frankly, you're saying conservatives, congressmen, et cetera, stand on principle. No, they stand on basically on the question of what their constituents believe is legitimate. If the court is delegitimated in front of the eyes of enough people, you have a problem. Democracy is not like a thing. It's a belief. It's a belief in the large number of people. Institutions are just beliefs. And so if you undermine these beliefs enough, it's over. It's over.
But do you think that enough of the Republican base cares enough? Like you said, the people that you talk to in Colorado, they're not like hardcore politicos. They're not following the twists and turns of the court. So for this to be a defining moment where they say, oh, we don't believe in the system anymore, they'd really have to be into politics. I just don't get a sense that that's really where a lot of the Trump supporters are.
I mean, there was only a handful of people who cared enough to go do January 6th. But then after January 6th, the story was built up enough to be a mobilizing element in the Republican Party, that it became a litmus test within the Republican Party of how you relate and talk about this sort of stuff. So I don't know. I don't think you should have that much confidence in the horse sense of people. People, in fact, insofar as that they don't pay enough attention, something like January 6th happens, they're like, oh, that looks messed up, and then the narrative spinning happens after that. And I think, quite frankly, Democrats lost the January 6th war. They came out as that they had the overreach. Can you imagine? Like a mob storms the Capitol, and Republicans managed to convince, I'd say like a good chunk of Americans, a good chunk. I don't know if good is more than 50, but like a good chunk of Americans, that Democrats like overreacted and overreached there.
Yeah. And it's sort of a good question in retrospect, why January 6th should have been obvious to the vast majority of Americans, and it should have been. It's interesting that it wasn't. It didn't turn out that way, and I don't know. As someone who thought that January 6th was bad, I can't really relate to those Americans who I think are as high as 2/3 of the Republican Party from various polls from, if I recall, 2022. How was it that 2/3 of Republicans actually ended up thinking that January 6th was sympathetic or justified? I'm sure there's a lot that could be said about the psychology of all of that. Anyway, that's just like a little aside. And it just shows like the limits of our own understanding of our own countrymen. When we try to understand what really motivates people, sometimes we're just kind of groping in the dark. because we have to put ourselves in the minds of people who are nothing like us. And even though that's something that we at Wisdom of Crowds try to do, we're trying to understand, why do people believe what they believe. There's always these built-in limits. There's only so far you can go in this kind of intellectual empathy, where you try to understand where people are coming from. It's just difficult to do, and I think we're entering a time where it will become even more difficult.
I don't know though. Like I have a theory of the case. It's that you have, um, I mean, look, you have a lot of moral grandstanding, and an attempt to do lawfare on far too many of these fronts. The main problem was that they tried to do lawfare against Trump,
Yeah.
and they failed. Had they somehow had like a real sense of how they were going to do it, and like actually, quite frankly, a good case, which it sure looks like they didn't. And I don't blame the Supreme Court, balance on this, that it was somehow like rigged against him. I think that Jack Smith overreached in a big way in the lawfare against Trump. And then I think that's where your mixing and all the rest of it starts happening, is that you get a lot of sort of high dudgeon from Democrats about what Trump did, with backed by a very weak case that looked like for a while wasn't going to make it. You see them piling on Trump in many different ways. And then I think it's pretty easy for Trump to like make the connection between the supposed injustice that he is facing at the hands of these lawfare people, the injustice that the January 6th people themselves are facing, which actually, they're pretty much dead to rights. And this is why he's talking about pardoning and all the rest of that, and, doing it. And then more broadly, I think in the background of it is still this buzzing, this hideous buzzing of the progressive social agenda, which is just revolting to most people, just fundamentally revolting to most people. So you mix all those three together and then like wave your hands, and I don't know, it makes perfect sense to me how this sort of perfect storm ends up being, because I think I mean, this is just, you're talking about like intellectual empathy and how like basically people come to this sort of stuff. It makes perfect sense. It's bad politics mixed with a kind of righteousness unleavened by realpolitik on the part of the Democrats. You know what I mean? Like they had a theory of right, they had no theory of victory. And they on some level, that dumb phrase of Obama's, I think, still rattling in their head about the arc of history bending toward justice or whatever, because they have a theory of what is just, what is right, and they just believe it. And they have no sense of politics, an idea of how to do things, and they are reaping the whirlwind right now. They have gotten the shit kicked out of them, and our country is suffering for it.
Yeah, look, I agree with you that the overreach that happened after January 6th pushed a lot of people away. But I guess like what I'm wondering more is January 6th itself not arousing as much anger as we might have expected from Republicans. I mean, obviously there were some in the Senate and House who were quite outspoken against January 6th, and then they later would retract their comments and that sort of thing, including people like J.D. Vance and Tom Cotton and so forth. So I think the best version of the argument is that a lot of the sympathy towards January 6th happened well after the event itself, because of other things, because of Democratic overreach. That makes sense to me.
And look, I agree with you that Republicans are cowards on a lot of this stuff. And like, the great hero Mitch McConnell, I think, is going to go down as one of the great villains of history, because he blinked on impeachment and said, like, let civil courts sort this out. It's like, no, because you impeach him, you wouldn't be able to run again.
If only they could have defanged or sort of defeated Trump politically in that brief window after January 6th, just how better off the country would be. Wow. I mean, it's such a major missed opportunity. Every like Republicans underreached and then Democrats overreached. Everyone seemed to make the wrong decision about how to deal with Trump at precisely the time when it would have mattered most.
You know,
And I
you know
just
what's
wonder what.
you know, I don't know if I've made this joke to you. I'm sure I've made it to you in private, but you know, you remember that passage in The Prince and Machiavelli about you know, I forget who it was. Was it Savonarola who no, it wasn't. It was anyway one of these Italian magnates who sets up this whole big thing and has one of his minions is very brutal. And then in the morning, the minion is found in the main square, like beheaded and quartered in many pieces. And the populace is stupefied and satisfied by like this act of just executive, you know, violence. And you know, I don't know. Since we're in a realm of like executive orders and things like that, Biden calls like, you know, an emergency, state of emergency after January 6th, and just like executes Trump. That just solves the problem completely. And then, you know, it's like it's an extrajudicial act. But, you know, like that's the wisdom of both Machiavelli and Carl Schmitt is basically republics are founded and saved on completely extrajudicial moments. And there was a moment there basically to rid us of Trump. I mean, the actual
No, just to be clear,
moment,
you don't.
the
Yeah,
actual
yeah.
the simpler model would have been to impeach him, and therefore, you know, that then prevents him from running again. But you know, short of that, like, yeah, I don't know. I think the mistake was thinking that law would find justice, and the case against Trump is on the merits weak. Shadi, he did not. Like, it's hard to prove that he was an insurrectionist on the merits. So they screwed up. They looked at the facts and they were like, no, we know what justice is. We'll work backwards and figure out what facts will get us there. And that's bad. That's dumb. That's not like, again, this is what I'm getting at is like politics is above law, always is. So my little joke about having Trump executed on the town square there, that's what I'm getting at. Like, the law is not your friend. You know what I mean? The law is just another instrument towards like doing stuff.
Yeah,
Maybe
Trump.
that's extreme,
Trump
but
always had plausible deniability, and yeah, he never actually said anything that directly tied him to the violent acts that happened.
It's not plausible deniability. There was not enough evidence.
Yeah.
On like the what the laws are for insurrection, for all of that, they didn't have him dead to rights. They just didn't. And that's the problem. And it's this belief that the law will find a way to get to justice. That's not how it works. That's simply not how it works. And as long as, you know, and, you know, so that's the other part is that like the continuing genius of the Trump people and the continuing, I think, wrongness of others as they sort of watch this is this belief in the law as something that exists outside of it. That's what is striking about what the Trump folks are doing all the time. They're finding weird ass laws, finding loopholes in them, and then just like ramming everything they've got into this sort of loophole. Like I said, I think with this Venezuelan thing, they've probably overreached. But it requires now the political will and the strength of one of the three branches to just basically smack these children down hard. Be like, no, you little brats, and just smack them across the face down. And that's the best hope we have right now, I think, because if that doesn't happen, I don't know. I guess then we're left waiting until the midterms, hoping that the people vote a bunch of these people out, and then Congress wakes up and starts doing politics again. Because
if this overreach continues, it's going to provoke more resistance, more opposition. I feel like Democrats are finally starting, not the party itself, but Democrats more broadly. There's like signs of life where I think
Gavin Newsom.
Well, not really Newsom. No, I mean he's doing this
doing a good job,
podcast with right-wing people. What?
I think it's good stuff.
I haven't listened to it. Yeah, I'm sure it's interesting. But look, I think there's a major miscalculation on the part of the Trump folks because they were so dominant after the election. Just the sense of like that they were finally taking control over the culture, that progressives were in retreat, that woke was done, that people were actually excited about not having to police their language when it came to race and sexuality and gender identity and all these things. they had the potential to forge a majority, like not a permanent majority, but maybe like a long running majority. They didn't have to alienate people this way. And already we see how Trump's approval ratings are dropping considerably just in the past couple of weeks. Like it raises this question of why are they doing this? Did they need to do this? Is this overreach going to serve them well in the midterms? Why do they want to provoke this kind of opposition? And that's the part that just seems like they may have made a miscalculation here.
I, my thoughts about the culture, how, and I don't think what you're describing really maps onto their motivations and how they saw the thing. I don't think that they saw that they have an ascendance in the culture. I think that they rightly saw that they have a moment of, deep disgust with the Democratic Party. And I think that they, given the vehemence at which they're going, I think they very well understand that they have a very narrow window to do this sort of stuff. And I think that what they want most, again, it's hard to tell, like, it's dangerous to ascribe too much of a plan to any of this, but like, I think the instinct is to just smash as much as possible of the machinery, the institutional machinery that serves Democrats. And if there's a theory of the case there that someone like Russ Vought or any one of these people has, is just like destroy as much of this stuff as possible. And in the, 6 months that you have, maybe a year that you have, get as many rulings as possible that empower a strong executive, because that's a good in and of itself. That all of these things, civil society, all these sorts of
But it won't be good if Democrats win in 2028. If there's a Democratic president who then avails himself,
look, the truth is that's been going on. Some say, really took off with Obama, and okay, so but they probably see is that destruction is better than building. And that destruction serves their purposes better than a deeply institutionalized state that will serve Democrats better in any case. So, okay, I don't know. I'm not convinced that they have, some sort of plan to seize power forever. But I think they do see that destroying as much of the infrastructure as possible serves them better for when they're in power. And that the revolutionary moment right now is not to overthrow democracy, but to make it a very strong executive democracy and just wreck as much as possible between now and then.
To what end, though? What is the ultimate end?
To destroy progressivism, ultimately, because progressivism does need these institutions and does need this sorts of stuff. And so basically, I think that's the sort of idea. Look, I think they do have a theory of the case of victories, that it's probably easier for them to contest a presidency, and if over the next X number of years, and have a very strong presidency to keep beating down the Democrats. And if Democrats have only 4 or 8 years to rebuild something, and then in comes the hammer after that's a better status quo than having a democracy that is institutionalized deeply and protects progressive core values.
Okay, basically. But why? But I guess maybe I don't mean to sound naive here, but I do want to raise the question. I mean, why do they hate progressivism so much? I dislike cultural progressivism for sure, and I share many of these concerns. But to hate something so much that you would break the state and destroy American institutions in the service of that goal, you must have something that is well beyond dislike.
It's called reaction, I think.
I just wonder where that sentiment comes from. You really, I just don't know how people can summon up that level of political hatred for their enemies, particularly considering that America, for all its faults under Democratic leadership, you can go about doing most of what you want to do without fear of persecution. It's still a democracy. You might feel constrained in some ways culturally, but I don't know. We're not living under an authoritarian, we weren't living under an authoritarian regime. So for them to act as if it was an authoritarian regime that they wanted to destroy and dismantle, it's just very hard for me to relate to that.
I think this just gets back to like the main thing that you and I have always argued about, right? Which is that I fundamentally believe in tribalism as the ultimate thing, and I've always found, America quite miraculous how it's managed to tame that. I think you just had some political entrepreneurs that have figured out how to introduce a more lasting tribalism. I don't know how long it lasts
But
into
what's the
our
appeal
system.
of that? Why would anyone
Because it's the most human.
live with that?
Because democracy and tolerance is not human and normal. It requires a level of above the base. And if you can demagogue your way down to the lower, more violent, less elevated thing, I think it's easier and it's a path to power. And that's really what it comes down to. I think that democracy, and this is always something about, I think a problem with when you talk about minimal democracy and all of these sorts of things, it's like, oh, well, the people need to be. I think you just need to have like very wise leaders and a kind of like ruling elite that is able to, I think, channel this sort of stuff. Once that breaks down, once you have that kind of like, I'd say, base state of nature, zero-sum attitude, once that's unleashed among people, it's quite natural. And the destruction is unbound by it. And I think
But it's not
put
a
that
fun
genie
way-
back in the put that genie back in the bottle is very hard. And this is why I think you're frustrated very much when young democratic experiments in other countries fall apart due to nasty, ugly tribalism and all the rest of it. The reason is I think democracy has been stable in Europe because like a lot of the ethnic cleansing and stuff happened already. So like that those things are now left to sort of ideological tribalisms, which ultimately matter less. But I don't know. I think Trump's managed to create an other that is pretty close to like ethnic hatred. You know what I mean? And like ethnic hatred, when you talk about it, people are like, oh, but what is it about ethnic hatred? No, it's just a thing. It's just like hatred. You know what I mean? Hatred of the other. That's it. That's there's something there that's just primal in human beings.
Yeah,
And everything else
I get
is
that it's
superstructure.
primal, Damir, but I don't find it to be a fun way to live. Like, what I find much more appealing is the idea of being left alone, doing what you want to do, not thinking too much about politics, the state, or government, and just like, and you can have the tribalism on a local level. You can be with the people you want to be with, and avoid people you don't want to be with. Like all of that is possible at the local community level. But to allow politics to animate your life to such an extent that you're perpetually consumed by hatred, that's the part. Like, why would you want to live in a state of hatred? It's not even good for your health.
I mean,
Anyway, this is
again,
me being maybe a little bit naive, but
no,
yeah,
I don't know.
that's just-
I don't think it's naive necessarily because I mean, look, as we wrap, here's the maybe the positive way to think about it is that I think the case for perpetual hatred that Trump is making is hard to sustain in a country this big, where most people, as you said, are like, okay, whatever. I think that it was possible to get like a coalition together to get it over the line in this election because the Democrats were so like obviously distasteful to so many people. But yeah, at some point, if things get to the point of strife at the highest levels and the Supreme Court is unable or gets into like open conflict with the executive, I'd like to hope that voters who are not paying attention look at this and be like, hey, okay, like
this is going too far.
This is going too far. And then, really, as I said earlier in this conversation, all you need is like a real backlash in Congress in the midterms, and then you get like the third branch at this point also standing up, and I think there was a piece on tariffs that I think you were tweeting from National Review saying that on tariffs, Congress can just like stop this all at once. Yeah. Of course, they can't right now because they're beholden to Trump and Trumpism. even with narrow majorities, like it's incredible the level of discipline that they've managed to keep. Like the level of terror on the right is huge, but all it takes one election to change that, and then all of it starts going the other way in a pretty spectacular fashion. So it's like the idea that somehow all is lost. Far from it, but we're heading into turbulent waters, I think.
Indeed. That's a good place upon which to end. We shall
All right,
see.
my friend.
Okay,
Indeed, we
Damir.
shall.
Good
All
talking
right,
to you.
talk soon.
Later.
Bye.
Bye.